Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so glad you're here joining me for this, let's say, webinar version of the workshop, the ADHD, Sensory, and Autism Workshop that we do in our office every few months. I'm so glad you found your way here. Whether you're watching this as a YouTube video or you're watching this embedded in our website, wherever you're watching this, I'm really glad you're watching it. I am Dr. Jake Grinacher. I am the founder and one of the chiropractors here at Strive Chiropractic in Fargo. We run a very large wellness-based practice, chiropractic practice in both Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and Fargo, North Dakota. And it's about 40% kids, and a huge percentage of those kids are dealing with some of the same challenges that you may be the reason you're joining us here this evening. So we're going to work through this this recorded version. I am not the greatest with technology, so I'll click through, but please, if you could shut off all distractions, mute the phone, do whatever you need to, because I'm going to try to keep this quick, about a half hour. I'm going to try to keep it to really give you guys some tools, tips, and strategies to help your child with whatever they're going through, whether it be something on that ADHD, ADD spectrum, in the sensory processing disorder realm, or in the autism Asperger's realm. Hopefully they start putting together some pieces for you and you start seeing why we're doing this. So I have some slides for you. I'm going to try to share them up here. Like I said, hopefully this all works. And if it does, that'll be fantastic, because technology is not always my friend. So I will plug through here. So hopefully you are seeing me on the side of the computer somewhere, and you are seeing these slides as we go through. So like I said, this is a live version that we're doing in our office, but we had so much of a demand for those that couldn't make it, that maybe didn't have some help with their kids, that just got really hard for the nights that we were doing it, that we wanted to turn this into a webinar version that you are watching, hopefully from your pajamas at home, and soaking up the information, taking some notes, and really ready to take some action on some things for you and for your child. So let me tell you a little bit about why I'm here. Now, this may not make sense if you're looking at this picture of this luxury, gorgeous 5-star hotel, but I want to put you in a situation. I want you to imagine something for me. So I want you to imagine that you watching this, you're staying in the 11th floor of this hotel, right? And I'm in the lobby, and that there's a small explosion in the boiler room that I hear, and a fire starts to erupt from this boiler room, right? And it's catching fire, and the fire is growing rapidly. And for whatever reason, the alarm system isn't working in the hotel. So I take off, right? I take off, I come up to the 11th floor, and bam, 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 bam. I beat on your door, and you come to the door, and I say, listen, we have to go. We have to get to the hotel. There's a fire in the lobby. Get your stuff and let's go, right? And you may start to argue with me a little bit. You may start to say, well, I don't smell smoke. I didn't hear any type of alarm system. And as much as I would like to sit there and argue with you that, no, I just saw it, I was in the lobby, I saw the fire, there's 11 more floors of people that need to be saved, and I have to move on and pound on that next door to hopefully get as many people as I can to follow me to safety outside of the building. Now, the reason I tell that story, you can stop imagining now, but the reason I tell that story is there's so many parallels to the work that we do here at our office with kids and dealing with some of these ADHD, sensory, or autism challenges, because a lot of the information we're going through tonight probably won't be new. It may be a new context that you've heard. I'm going to give you guys an opportunity at the end of this webinar to get your kids and maybe the rest of your family checked in our office. And if it doesn't something that resonates with you, it's not something you want to do, that's okay, right? It's the same situation as this hotel, right? There is so many families dealing with this, and we only have so much time in our day that we need to move on to that next family, pound on the next door to get them to help, right? I'm not here to drag you into our office. I'm here to hopefully provide you some tools, tips, and strategies that you can use going forward in your own life. And if there's something that resonates and it's something that we can help you with, man, I hope you pick up that phone and call, or send an email, or direct messages on social media, text, now that we're texting appointments, that kind of thing. I hope you take advantage of that. I hope we see you or your child in the office. But if not, that's okay. Know that I'm not here to try to convince you of anything. I'm not trying to drag you along. I'm simply here to share some information and a message with you that you may not have heard before or may not have heard in this light. So that's just a little bit about the work that we do. I want you guys to watch this video coming up here. It's kind of a funny video, but it'll make a little bit more sense as we move forward. But please watch.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? No. The answer is 13.
Hopefully you got it. You getting the answer, 13 passes?
Did you see the moonwalking bear?
Take a look again. It's easy to miss something you're not looking for. I hope you saw the moonwalking bear on the second video that was going right through the middle, but we're so busy looking at the team in white passing the first time, we don't even see the obvious that's coming right through the screen, right? Now, this is an article or a commercial for watching out for cyclists, right? But that makes a lot of parallels, again, into the work that we're doing. A lot of this stuff that I'm going to share with you probably isn't new, right? I don't think there's a lot that I'm going to be sharing with you that's probably unheard. There may be a few things, right? But a lot of it's going to be looked at in a different light. There's a different lens, through a different perspective, right? And I hope that opens up some eyes for you, because we may be looking at that team in the white in the past, and we've missed the moonwalking bear walking right in front of us, okay? So as we move on here, this workshop and this work that we've done, there's a group of pediatric chiropractors across the country. They're doing a lot of work with kids in this arena of ADHD, sensory processing autism, Asperger's, all those kind of arenas. And the work that we're doing is called the perfect storm, right? And I want to kind of break this down for you, but these workshops used to be called the perfect storm, but it was a little bit confusing on what we're talking about. So I made it simple, but I want to explain to you guys the perfect storm, okay? So if you think in meteorology terms, right? A perfect storm is when multiple storms come together and it forms a mega storm, or there's perfect scenarios, the right amount of humidity, right? The right pressure fronts coming in, the right amount of moisture in the air, so that already with humidity, right? The idea of it is there's the perfect scenarios all come together for a mega storm, right? And again, the work that we're doing and a lot of the stuff that we're working through is the same thing. And we're looking at the perfect storm as it deals with your child. So if we look at this and we break it down, what's going on? What do we mean by the perfect scenarios come together? We're talking about the amount of stresses bombarding your child's system. Maybe it's your system if you're watching this, between the physical stress, the emotional stress, and the chemical stress, right? And as these things come together, it overwhelms the body, right? And it causes a fuse to blow. I'll get to all that in a second. In a term that we call subluxation. Now, you're not going to have to use that term in a sentence. You're not going to spell it at the end. I want you to think of it as we talk through about that blown fuse idea, because that's what's happening in the body. It's being overwhelmed. Bam, something happens, and now we're bombarded with all these different things. So, but it's this physical, chemical, and emotional stress that the body is dealing with. So let's look at the physical stresses. Now, again, I could talk about an adult and our sedentary lives and our desk jobs and the car accidents and all the other things going on, but we're looking at this through the lens of a child. And sometimes people say, child, physical traumas, physical stresses, what are you talking about, right? Now, if we look at just the first phases of their life, we look at in utero constraint, right? Especially if we're talking multiples. We're talking about maybe a very small mother, very short, not as much room. Let's talk about positioning being off, breech babies, low fluid, all of these kind of things. Even in utero constraint, when everything is, quote, normal, is tough. But you had any of these other scenarios, the amount of in utero constraint goes up. But the biggest culprit and the biggest thing that we work with, and I think the biggest thing that's challenging our society today that we're not talking about and not doing anything enough with, is birth trauma. Now, if you look at the most, quote, normal, natural vaginal delivery, we're talking about 60 to 80 pounds of axial traction or pulling to get a baby out of the birth canal, right? And if you look at, you're being so careful when you're handing that baby to grandma, right? Make sure the head is cradled, everything is perfect, which it should be. But we're talking about 60 to 80 pounds of pulling to get a baby out during that delivery. Now, when you add things like long labors, extended amounts of pushing, forceps, vacuum, cord issues, C-section delivery is actually higher than vaginal delivery. We're talking about 90 pounds plus of pulling or axial traction that happens on a baby. And this is not a knock on OB nurses or OB doctors. They're doing a fantastic job and they have to get the child into this world, right? But you look at the amount of trauma that causes on that spine, especially in the upper cervical spine where that pulling happens and the twisting that comes through their shoulders it is massive. It is massive. I'm going to get to some of those numbers and statistics coming up. But that is a huge thing that we're not talking about enough. And it happens to every baby that's brought into this world, okay? Now we fast forward a little bit. We look at childhood falls, right? We look at car seats, baby Bjorns, bouncy seats, right? All of these things we strap our babies in, and they're not uncomfortable being in that way. It's a lot of stress on this young baby's body that doesn't have the muscular control or all the things that it should to support its body. It's a lot of stress. Birth trauma being the biggest, but as we move forward, there's a lot of other things in there as well. The next thing I want to show you in this next video, you're going to be warned. If you want to look away for a second, that's okay. Is I want to show you a C-section delivery. This next video is actually a C-section delivery. For those that are thinking like, yeah, but I had a C-section, I know what you're talking about. They just cut and lift and all is good. That's got to be less than a vaginal birth. Wrong. Okay, if you didn't have a C-section, that's okay. I want to show you this video. If you did have a C-section and maybe you felt yourself moving around on the table, you'll now see why you were moving around the table. But be warned, this is a very graphic video. I want to make sure I show you guys, but again, if you need to look away, that's okay. So take a look at here. Head is coming through. Traumatic already with just pulling the head through, but I want you to watch this next part. Oh, that kind of makes my stomach turn watching it again and again. And it's not because of the blood and the cutting and the gore. It's the amount of force being pulled back and forth and twisting to get that baby out and up. And we're wondering where there's birth trauma happening. It's right there. Okay. Look no further. That's it. Okay. So I want to share in some of these numbers and some of the research that was done. Now, the research that was done by Dr. Gutman, an MD, this was years ago. This was actually in the mid-'80s that he was doing it. We examined like 3,000, something like that, babies after birth. And when he found that there was spinal injury present in 80% of infants examined shortly after birth. And I can tell you clinically, we've been here for 11 plus years in Fargo and seen thousands and thousands of babies in here. And I can say about every 4 to 5 babies that we see are having some type of the spinal injury, especially the vertebral spine, after birth. Right. And that's what he kind of found. Now, what he found in his research is he found that this spinal injury was caused by caused interference to the neurologic and immune function because the close tie, and I'll get into much of this in a little bit, because the close tie to the upper cervical spine and all this stuff happening as it relates to neurologic and immune function. And he talked about this joint complex at the top. And again, this is not something you have to use in a sentence, but this occipito-atlantoaxial joint complex. That's just the upper two bones of the neck and the base of your skull. Should be examined, again, this is the quote from the study, should be examined and, if required, specifically adjusted, as the success of the adjustment overshadows every other type of treatment. Now, I want that to sink in for a second. This is a medical doctor looking at babies after birth and looking at 80% of them with spinal injury causing neurologic and immune function decrease or interference to that system, and saying that this complex, this issue, should be examined and, if required, adjusted, as this is the most important thing we can do for a baby after they're born. Now, oh my gosh, I wish this was shown from mountaintops. I wish this wasn't the first time you're hearing this, but it probably is, and that's okay, because hopefully we'll make different decisions moving forward. But this is the reason we are so passionate about seeing babies checked immediately after birth, so we can get them started on the right track. We can get them moving forward. It's why we're so blessed and fortunate to see multiple babies that are a few days old every week to be able to check them, give them that right start. And if that's not you and you haven't done that, that's okay. That's not to put shame and, oh my gosh, I should have, or something like that. I just want to paint the picture of where this birth trauma is starting and the cascade of effects that it causes going forward. Okay, so now I want to look at this chemical stress. We looked at the physical stresses a little bit, but let's take a look at the chemical stresses. Now, if you were watching this webinar, let's say 10, 15 years ago, now I didn't know if you could watch a webinar 10 or 15 years ago, but if you could, this chemical stresses would be something that I have to probably let sink in for a little while longer, because it probably wouldn't be forefront of what's going on in the world. But this is something that we're talking about and looking at, is on the news, is going on every single day. We're talking about preservatives, pesticides, processed foods. Our food system is shot. Like, this is not something you're probably hearing for the first time, right? We look at the amount of sugar, grains, dairies, diets everywhere, right? We look at the amount of chemicals, household chemicals, from cleaners and detergents and plastics, and all the stuff in our environment, to the amount of medications that are in our system now versus what they were 30 years ago. The amount of chemical stresses that we're facing as a society is insane. But we look at this from a child's perspective, it's starting earlier and earlier and earlier, and it's bombarding their system from the get-go. So now we have this massive amounts of physical stresses, right? Now we have the chemical stresses that are being laced in, right? Now if you look at the mental and the emotional stress, now if we're looking at this from the lens of a kid, there's still a lot of emotional stress that are happening to kids nowadays. We look at stressful, fear-based pregnancies. One of the things that I always tease the attendees of when they're attending this live workshop is I ask them, who has all read the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting? And most of the hands go up in the room. And I said, doesn't it seem like that book is written by Stephen King? Because it just freaks you out at every turn, right? You're stressed about everything. It's fear, it's fear, it's fear. We're getting these appointments and 40 ultrasounds every time to make sure things are okay. And it's changing this idea of birth, the fact that it's an amazing natural thing that happens to something that becomes a symptom or a diagnosis that we have to then treat and do all these things for and be scared of the whole time through. And that changes the physiology of the baby and the mom big time. We talk about stressful, forced, emergency deliveries, right? NICU stays, high-paced, high-stress, fast-paced lives. We talked about kids as they're getting older, about getting labeled. Now, maybe some of your kids walking around with a label and an IEP and special help, and thank goodness for them if they need that, and it's helping them through. But that can't be easy on them, walking through life, with these labels, right? And the bullying, I know when I was growing up, at least bullying stopped when you left the school. Nowadays, bullying starts when you leave school, and it's online and it's on all the social medias. Guys, the mental and emotional stress facing our kids nowadays has never been higher, right? It's safe to say, I'd say it's 10 times higher than it was even 10 or 15 years ago. So now we look at the physical, the chemical, the emotional stresses being stacked and stacked and stacked and stacked, and all of these things are bombarding the system. And we see these fear-based pregnancies with birth interventions, colic, poor sleep, feeding problems, chronic ear infections, antibiotics, toxic environments. We talk about TV, video games, all of this stress that we have going on. That's the new normal. So we look at this perfect storm that's the stuff that's facing our kids nowadays, and all the things they're going to, from the labels to all of the different stresses and anxieties and stuff that they're facing. I'm going to draw the lines here. I'm going to make these things a bit clearer coming up. But I just wanted to paint a picture of what this looks like, what the stresses that are facing our children are, right? What's happening, what's going on, what's really affecting our kids nowadays. So I want to start drawing that connection. Okay, well, wait a second. Okay, I understand how all this is affecting our kids. I understand you're a chiropractor, but where is the parallel? I thought that chiropractic is just about sore backs or headaches. And yes, that stuff can be helped. That's great. But really what chiropractic is about the nervous system, right? It's about the master control system of the body. The job of the nervous system is to perceive the environment which we're in and coordinate the behavior of all other cells, right? You eat food. The job of the nervous system is the sense that, okay, we ate, and it's to turn on, coordinate digestion in our body, right? And it's going to do something with that food that we ate. It's nutritious. Hopefully it's making into wonderful things in our body. If it was toxic, hopefully it's getting rid of it, right? But the idea of it is that's the job of the nervous system. The easiest example when you think about it is that you're moving your hand toward a hot stove, right? You may not know what's on. And all of a sudden you start to feel the heat, right? The heat sends a signal to your body or up to your brain back to your hand, boom, you move your hand, right? That is happening millions and millions and millions of times every single second. It's that super highway of afferent and efferent communication happening back and forth. And the job of chiropractic is to make sure that's firing and wiring exactly the way it should from the moment a baby is born until your last breath, is to make sure those communication pathways are open and they're not interfered with and everything is happening like it should. So if we back this up, we look at chiropractic in the sense of what's going on with these kids. And again, there's many parallels. Maybe with you as a parent, there's things going on that you're thinking like, whoa, this is me that I'm learning about here too in a second. But let's just take that birth trauma that's, again, present in 80 to 85% of kids. And we're looking at the amount of axial traction and pull. We're looking at the amount of stress and chemicals and all this junk hitting their body. Well, what happens is there's this misalignment that happens in the very upper cervical spine. And that's what that research that I showed was talking about in that top joint complex in the neck. This is what's happening. in there. But the body becomes overwhelmed by those things. Those stresses that I mentioned, especially that birth trauma, becomes overwhelmed, causing a fixation or a misalignment of the spine. Again, if we want to get nerdy on it, and again, I am sorry if we're going a little deep here. I'll try to speed through it. I'm not trying to use big words and make this confusing. But those that are more analytical and they want to understand some of the science behind it, I want to make sure I give that to you as well. Okay. But dyskinesia is what that's called, is this fixation, lack of movement in the upper part of the cervical spine. That's where that fuse is blown, right? The body's overwhelmed by the physical, chemical, emotional stresses. That fuse is blown, right? That fuse is what we refer to as a subluxation. Again, you don't have to use that word again. But a subluxated joint loses its ability to go through normal range of motion, so it becomes fixated in that spot. Now, neurological, like the upper cervical spine, the whole spine, a big job of it, but especially in that upper cervical spine, one of the jobs is to charge the brain's batteries. Over half of the neurons in the spinal cord are there for this specific function. It's to charge the batteries of the brain. And a huge percentage of those, right, over half the neurons, and even a big chunk, those I think is 40% of those, are located in the upper cervical spine, right? When these joints are fixed, they cannot provide the proprioception, the good input to the brain, and then the bad input, it's called nociception, takes over. It's called the gate theory, right? So basically, it's supposed to go in and out, and this system has to get information from somewhere. And if the joint is fixed and it can't get the good proprioception, the bad input, that nociception, takes over, and that is called disafferentation. Okay, hopefully you're following along here. Excuse me. This imbalance in the central nervous system causes the body to go into fight or flight. Now, this is that sympathetic overload, and that's called dysautonomia. Now, if you look at this is a great example on this slide. It looks at this teeter-totter, right? Our central nervous system basically has these two parts to it. It's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is that fight or flight response. If I were to release a tiger into your living room or wherever you're watching this, your body goes into fight or flight, right? You jump, you hide, or you run, you punch the tiger, something happens, right? All the stuff happens. You're shunting blood from your digestive system and putting it into your legs, right? Your pupils dilate, your heart speeds up, all these things that happen in fight or flight. It's amazing for that system, for that job, right? The other side of that teeter-totter is the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the rest and digest part, the digestion, circulation, healing, all the stuff that happens. And you should be able to go back and forth, and your body should, right? If that tiger is released, boom, sympathetic kicks in as you realize that, okay, that didn't actually happen. Life is okay. Everything balances out, and that parasympathetic kicks back on, okay? So what happened is that sympathetic overload happens where the body gets stuck in that sympathetic system, right? It's sympathetic overload, or it's stuck in the fight or flight. And if you're seeing this quote on here, I love this quote. We'll get back to it a little bit more later. But the body cannot be in growth and protection at the same time. I want you to remember that as we go through here. So if the body's protecting itself in the fight or flight, it can't be in growth, okay? Excuse me. This sympathetic overload, what happens is that it leads to overstimulation and dysfunction of the body, and eventually causes symptoms to occur. Well, however you're watching this, there's going to be ways to get a hold of us, but make sure that you are looking. If you want a copy of this, again, you can pause this video, but make sure if you want a copy of this, email us, direct message us, call us, and we'll get this to you as well. But what happens is overstimulation or dysfunction occurs in the body, eventually causing symptoms to occur. And we look in that upper part of the cervical spine. This is a massive amount going into the neurological and immune functions of our body. This is where we look at that colicky, very rigid babies. It's also what goes in the ears, eyes, nose, throats, allows the drainage. If it's not working and not draining properly, we get a lot of ear infections, sinus infections, right? It's also sleep is a big one. Anxiety, depression cycles, and the mood cycles are a big one because the mood centers of our brain are in that area. We start to look at focus, attention, whether that be ADHD in there. It's that overstimulation happening in there, and it's getting way too many signals to the brain. It's all of that that's happening in there, and that's where we're seeing a massive, massive, massive issue. Again, going back to that birth trauma and the cascade that happens to lead us to here into the overstimulation, dysfunction, and symptoms that show up. And this has become the new normal, like I said, of what's going on. So when we look at this in our office, how do we know that's happening? How do we know that this is happening? Because if I were to run into you in the grocery store and you were to say, I had this kid or my husband or my wife or my neighbor is dealing with these challenges, is this something you can help with? The best answer I have at that moment is, I don't know, but I can tell you what we will check. And this is how we really dive into it and analyze what's happening in that child to see if this is what's going on. Because up to this point, it's a theory for you or your child. It's a theory if that's happening. We don't really know if that's happening until we're doing some testing. And I will say all the time is, we don't guess, we test, right? So this is a core scoring technology. What it's actually looking at is a nervous system scanning technology. It's 3 different scans that we take that's looking at a lot of different things in the bodies. I'm going to walk through these here in a second. But it's giving us scoring and data based on if that nervous system is overstimulated, dysregulated, if it's turned on, too high, too low, where it's coming from, and we can really analyze if this is happening in your nervous system or your child's nervous system. And the great thing about these scans is just reading what's coming out. It's not putting anything in. So it's perfectly safe for children and pregnant women and everybody, because it's just reading what's coming out. But these are actually the scans that are coming out. If you want to look down this lower right-hand corner and you see this kind of the bullseye with the green and the yellow and the orange and the red, that one is looking at the actual autonomic activity diagram. It's a heart rate variability scan. It's looking if the body is stuck in that sympathetic or parasympathetic and how much autonomic activity is happening. A really, really amazing scan. We can tell if that teeter-totter is stuck, right, in your child, how long it's been stuck. Has it been drained out for quite a long time? And that's showing up in that heart rate variability scan. The other one we have is a thermal imaging, a rolling thermal scan. That's letting us know a lot of the organ systems and where that neurological connection communication is going, and if there's irritation or pinching at that area and it's not communicating like it should. And the last one is looking at a surface EMG, which is looking at muscle energy and the amount of activity, and stimulation happening in the body. And that, again, tells us a lot of really great stuff. I'm going to get through some case studies here in a second so you can see how this stuff becomes applicable as we look at it with children and maybe specifically your child. So I want to talk about this case study here. And this case study, we're going to call this kid Aiden here, okay? Aiden is 12 years old. I know you probably, if you're looking at this, you might see something at the top called a raging bull. This is never something we call your child or we use as far as labeling of kids. But like I mentioned earlier, there is hundreds of thousands of doctors across the globe working on this stuff that are starting to change the outcomes of these kids. And when we're looking at scans, we're going over case studies together to avoid confidentiality and to make sure we're all on the same page. We have some terms that we use in this raging bull is one of them here. But if we look at it, this is that surface EMG, that muscle energy scan. And what it's looking at, if you kind of see these numbers, we see 3 different numbers. It's a pattern of symmetry and a total energy number in there. All these should be roughly 100, give or take, in there, depending on what's going on with the child. But we look at this one in Aiden, and we look at the total energy being near 400, right? Again, it should be around 100. The total energy is the amount of signals going to the brain, the amount of noise that's created, right? So if we take the amount of signals hitting the brain, the amount of noise that's going on, and we turn it up 4 times harder than it should be, that's just the amount of boom, 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 boom that's hitting the brain. Now, you talk about inability to focus. You talk about being kind of all over the place. You kind of talk about difficulty transitioning to one thing to the next, because there's 4 times the amount of signals hitting the brain. This is very common in children that are diagnosed with ADHD cases. They're just very high energy, very difficult focusing, and that's looking at the amount of noise and signals hitting the brain and what's happening in that area. Now, I'm going to go through some more of these case studies and kind of explain a little bit better about what we're doing with that. But this is what we're seeing with the increased amount of noise hitting that system. And it shows up very commonly in ADHD cases. And we can actually test and measure and monitor this and track it, hopefully tracking improvement with your child as we're working with them based on these numbers in there. The next case study, we'll call him Bennett. Bennett was 14, and we're looking at a lot of symptoms in here with Bennett, and I'll get to in a second. Again, ignore that drunken bull connotation at the top. These were scans taken from our office. We were actually doing a case study with a group of doctors. But we look at those 3 numbers again, and that pattern graph being very off, right? Again, that should be near 100. And the pattern is the brain's ability to understand the incoming signals, right? So the amount of signals are roughly where they should be, right? 140, that's kind of within that normal range. So the amount of signals hitting the brain are okay. But when they're getting there, they're scrambled. The there's a very big inability to understand those signals, and it's showing up in Bennett's case as sensory processing disorder. Right? For those unfamiliar with sensory processing disorder, I like to liken it to all of your senses are turned up to about 100. right? If there's a rustling of papers going on in a room down the hallway, it's all you hear. There's a tag in the back of your shirt, you can't ignore it. A smell of someone's cologne around the corner, everything is heightened, everything is turned up, and you just can't process. You see a lot of tics, a lot of having to get rid of energy, a lot of obsessive type behaviors because they can't handle certain things. It's because the brain's ability to understand these incoming symptoms are jumbled. Right, and that's what we're seeing in these cases. And again, this pattern graph, these pattern scores is how we can track, monitor, and hopefully watch improvement of these kids. That's what we're starting to work with, and I'll get to that a little bit more in a second. And this last case, we'll call him Connor, as a 9-year-old. We look at these numbers, and we look at pattern and volume is off, right? We look at with Connor, we had 3 times the amount of energy hitting the brain, and when it got there, the body didn't know what to do with it. Very, very common in autism and Asperger's type cases, right? We see a lot of those things. There's a lot of noise, a lot of inability to focus, comprehend, to give those things, and it's really not understanding those signals when they come in here, okay? Now, the diagnoses are not something that we get overly concerned with, and you may be thinking, that's kind of odd, but we're working with the kids, right? We're working with Connor in this case. We're not working with autism, right? We're looking at these scans, and if we can turn down this noise and turn up the comprehension to allow Connor to be able to transition easier and to be more verbal with his family and to get through his days so much easier and to have so much more success in his everyday world, just by being able to turn down the noise and turn up the ability to understand the signals, which is really amazing. And I want you guys to understand with this is something that we are working with, right? When we look at these patterns, these are the numbers, but if we take them back to those actual thermal imaging scans where we can see where these fuses are blown, and we can start to turn these signals back on, and we start to see this noise come down and the comprehension turn up. It is so amazing to be able to sit with these kids and sit with these parents as there's tears in their eyes, see the difference of what these children are dealing with, and maybe 4, 5, 6 short months later to see the changes in their child, right? Now, we can't guarantee results. I don't know what's going on with your kid, but I can tell you we have seen such massive changes. If you could see the kids before and the kids after, you would be shocked. And we are talking hundreds of thousands of kids we have the joys of seeing with. And I hope if this is something you're struggling with, your child is next and something that we can really see if we can do something for in that area. So if we're looking at now, a lot of people at this point, they're wondering, oh man, you just described my child when you talked about that incoming energy, the noise, or man, maybe it's yourself. Maybe it's you that we're talking about here. This, you just described me. This makes so much sense. This is the missing link. This is what we've been looking for. This is the piece. And you're wondering, what can we do about it? Okay. Like I mentioned earlier, what we need to do is get it checked. I'm not sure if we can help your child. I'm not sure what's going on with your child. I do know that we can take those scans and we can sit knee to knee and we can discuss, hey, here's what's happening. Can we help or can't we? And if we can, here's a game plan. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to monitor. Here's how we're going to track. And here's how we're going to move forward. And I would be so honored to be able to do that with you and your family. Now, that first visit, what it is, it's a comprehensive consultation and systems review. We're going all the way back to what's going on, maybe from birth through childhood, really looking at the amount of stresses and energy that are off or affecting this child. We're going to a full, extensive chiropractic examination, detailed scans, and the core scoring, right? We do have an on-site digital x-ray, so we very, very, very rarely doing that for kids, but if we need it, we have it here, right? Maybe there's more than one of your kids affected. Maybe it's you that are saying, wow, this makes a lot of sense for me. We can schedule the whole family at one time, and that makes sure that maybe if a kid's a little bit nervous about what the scans are, and they just roll up the back and sit on your finger. I probably they're very, very, very low key. They're very simple, and it's really a good way for us to develop trust and rapport with your child. But we can get everybody scanned. Maybe we want to scan mom first and then child, right? So they can see that, wow, mom made it through, and it's really not that big of a deal, right? But we can make sure that we get everybody scheduled to get them checked out in that for you. So I'm going to stop the sharing of this and chat with you guys a little bit more here, if I can. If I can shut this off. There we go. Stop the share. Perfect. Hopefully I'm back. Hopefully you just see me here now. But the idea of it is I hope you take advantage of that. I hope you take advantage of that $79 first visit. I hope that you call us. I hope, if you're seeing this, we'll be reaching out to you via email. I hope you take advantage of that and reach out to us. Because I can tell you one thing, the parents that we see of the kids that are brand new babies, They're like, man, I wish I would have done this right when they were born. The ones that we see as toddlers, they're saying, man, I wish I would have done this when they were infants. And the ones that we're seeing when they're 10, 12, 14 years old, they're saying, man, I wish I could go back to when they were toddlers, right? And the first thing I do with parents, and I'll do it with you, is stop right there, right? Stop the mom guilt, stop the dad guilt, make a different decision, take advantage of that right now. But the one thing we can't get back is time, right? I've been quoted a few times saying that the best time to check a child is the minute they're born. The next best time is now, right? The one thing you can't get back is time. Let's get your child checked. Let's take them through that process. Let's run through all the scans. Let's do everything we can. And like I said, $79, that includes everything. We'll go over everything, do all the scans, and then we'll sit in the and we'll go over it all together. It includes that as well. And if we can't help your child or it's something you're not interested in, like I mentioned that hotel story at the beginning, that's okay, right? That's okay if it's not something you want to do or something you want to start, but let's at least get it checked out. Let's at least find out if there's something we can do about it. Go through that process. Let our doctors review it. Let us go over it with you because, like I said, time is something you can't get back. I hope you guys enjoyed your time here tonight. I hope you learned something. I hope you can take some of this stuff and apply it to your day and your life starting tomorrow. But if this is something you can help with, and this was maybe the nudge you needed, if this was the aha moment, right? If you've been looking for a sign, hopefully this is your sign. Take advantage. Call us. Our number we'll make sure we post all the numbers. Okay, phone numbers, emails, direct message on social media. Get a hold of us somehow because we would love to help you and we'd love to take advantage of that offer to get your kids checked out in there as well. So thank you so much. Hopefully our team, if you did leave an email to get to this page, we'll be reaching out to you very soon. But if not, you can always reach out to us. Until next time, guys, take care.